You were taught that human evolution was a story of upward progress, of primitive instincts slowly replaced by reason, of survival giving way to civilization. But what if that story was never linear? What if each step forward carried a hidden cost? What if evolution didn't just shape our bodies but wired contradictions into our minds, our emotions, our very sense of self? In this 2-hour descent, we explore 25 shocking paradoxes buried inside humanity's evolutionary journey. Facts that sound like fiction, instincts that betray us, and adaptations that may have doomed us from the start. These aren't just scientific oddities, they're psychological traps, inherited conflicts, and biological echoes that still control how we think, feel, and connect today. So put on your headphones, let your body rest, and prepare to fall asleep questioning the very traits that made us human. You were told that humanity came from a long, unbroken line, that if you traced your ancestry back far enough, you'd reach a single identifiable species, the common ancestor, a real creature, a real beginning. But what if that creature never existed? This is the paradox of the ancestor that didn't exist. The unsettling realization that the very starting point of humanity is a ghost in the fossil record, a transitional blur with no fixed identity, a being that both was and wasn't human, a predecessor that never truly arrived, yet somehow gave birth to everything we are. In biology, evolution isn't like a staircase with clean, evenly spaced steps. It's more like a foggy hill, shifting, muddy, with no clear line separating the old from the new. We like to imagine our evolutionary past as a neat lineage, Australopithecus to Homo habilis, to Homo erectus, to Homo sapiens. But the deeper scientists look, the messier the picture becomes. There was no moment when one species simply stopped and another began. No Homo habilis giving birth to a modern human baby. No divine spark that transformed one generation into something entirely new. Instead, there were slow, incremental changes across hundreds of thousands of years. Traits blended, overlapped, reappeared, vanished. And somewhere in that mess, our ancestor disappeared, not because it died, but because it never fully existed. The human lineage is not a tree. It's a tangled web of branches, species splitting, interbreeding, dying out, merging again. We now know that Homo sapiens coexisted with, and interbred with, other human-like species, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans. So who, exactly, was the one? There wasn't one. And here's where the paradox deepens. Our minds crave origins. We want a beginning. We want to point to a moment and say, that's where we began. That's when we became us. But evolution doesn't give us that gift. It gives us blur. It gives us ambiguity. It tells us we emerged slowly, messily, and without permission. We were never meant to have an origin story that made sense. You might be thinking, why does this matter? So what if we can't find a single ancestor? But think about what this does to our sense of self. If there was no single human ancestor, then there was no singular moment when we became human. Which means humanity isn't a status we earned. It's a moving target. One we're still chasing, one we may never fully reach. We're not a finished product, we're a phase, and that changes everything. It means we're built on uncertainty, that our biological past is not a story of arrival, but of constant becoming, that there may be no essential us to defend or define, that your DNA, your body, your mind, all come from a lineage of beings who never agreed on what it meant to be human. It also raises an uncomfortable truth. The line between us and them, between the civilized and the primitive, between the modern and the ancient was always imaginary. Every boundary we draw is for comfort, not clarity. Because the moment you try to define humanity, you realize you're trying to draw a border around a river. The ancestor didn't exist, not in the way we wanted, not in the way that gives us certainty. And yet, here you are, breathing, thinking, wondering, asking questions your ancestor couldn't ask, with a brain built from bones that never knew you were coming. So what do you do with that? You stop chasing beginnings. You start embracing the blur. Because maybe your origin isn't a moment in time, it's a process still unfolding. And maybe the story of who we are is less about where we came from, and more about how we continue to evolve, one forgotten echo at a time. You're told your brain is a gift, that it's what makes you human. The crown jewel of evolution, a 3-pound supercomputer capable of language, art, memory, self-awareness. But beneath the praise lies something more troubling, something hidden, in the folds of grey matter that shaped your world and fractured your mind. This is the paradox of the brain that grew too fast, where the very organ that made us dominant may have also made us unstable, anxious, and dangerously self-aware. Roughly 2 million years ago, something strange started happening. Our ancestors' brains began to grow at a pace never seen before in any other species. Homo habilis had a brain around 600 cubic centimeters. Homo erectus pushed it past 900. And by the time Homo sapiens arrived, we were packing over 1,300 cubic centimeters inside our skulls. That's more than double in less than 1 million years. Biologists call this encephalization, the explosive increase in brain size relative to body size. It was extraordinary. But evolution is rarely generous without a price. First, it nearly broke us at birth. Bigger brains meant wider skulls, and wider skulls meant riskier childbirth. Human infants are born prematurely, helpless, soft-skulled, because the alternative is death in the womb. No other primate gives birth to something so vulnerable. We adapted with social bonding and longer parental care, but it came from crisis, not design. And then came the second problem. We weren't ready for what we built. Our brains developed cognitive capabilities far beyond what evolution could stabilize. We gained language, but also internal monologue. We gained memory, but also regret. We gained imagination, but also fear of the future. We gained consciousness, but no off switch. This brain, this miracle of nature, brought a flood of inputs that our nervous systems had no precedent for. We began thinking about thinking, watching ourselves live, imagining scenarios that hadn't happened, and suffering for them as if they had. The same mind that allowed us to build tools and fire and shelter also allowed us to create nightmares out of silence, and the loop began. We became aware of death, not just as an event, but as a guarantee. The first species to truly understand that every breath brings us closer to the last. That awareness, so abstract, so terrifying, changed everything. We started fearing things we couldn't fight. Time, loss, emptiness. The brain grew, and so did the anxiety. We developed rituals, myths, and religions, not just to understand the world, but to cope with it, to create meaning where there was none, to give form to the void our overdeveloped minds kept discovering. And while those stories offered comfort, they also fed obsession, guilt, shame, ideology, war. Our intelligence allowed us to question everything, including ourselves. And that questioning never stopped. You sit in a room alone and spiral through your own thoughts, not because something is wrong with you, but because your brain is functioning exactly as designed. The problem is, the design was never finished. Your ancestors evolved for survival, not happiness, not peace. Your brain was sculpted for pattern recognition, threat detection, social comparison. It rewards you for solving problems, then creates new ones the moment you're done. It hoards information, stores trauma, magnifies perceived threats. It never stops moving because it never learned how to stop. And here's the paradox's cruelest twist. The more intelligent we became, the more disconnected we felt. Our ancestors lived in tribes, in nature, in rhythm with the earth. You live in abstract systems, digital realms, social media illusions. The brain that once helped you survive predators now panics over inboxes and expectations. It still floods your body with cortisol for emotional threats, as if a tiger were in the room. And it can't tell the difference. So what now? Do we curse the mind for its brilliance? Do we call our awareness a mistake? Or do we accept that being human means carrying a mind too powerful for peace, but capable of reflection, imagination, and empathy because of that very power? You didn't ask for this brain, but it's yours, and maybe learning to live with it, gently, curiously, without needing to solve it, is the next step in our evolution. Imagine early humans striking two stones together, watching sparks leap out like tiny lightning bolts. Imagine the first sharpened stick, the first carved bone, the first moment we realized that objects could be extended versions of our will. These moments seem like triumphs, evolution's grand achievements. But beneath that triumph is a deeper, stranger truth. This is the paradox of the tool that used its maker. The unsettling reality that, while we created tools to serve us, they ended up shaping us in return, rewiring our minds, reshaping our bodies, redefining what it even means to be human. At first, the relationship seems one-sided. We invent the hand axe, the spear, the fire pit. We master our environment, bend the wild to our needs. But tools, by their very nature, change the conditions of survival. And as they change the environment, they change us. We begin to rely on them, and with reliance comes adaptation. Anthropologists note that as our ancestors used tools more skillfully, their hands evolved for fine motor control. Thumbs grew stronger, fingers more dexterous. Brains reorganized to process the increased complexity of toolmaking and use. Those who couldn't keep up with tool culture were left behind, not just physically, but socially. And so the feedback loop began. We didn't just make tools, we evolved because of them. Tools gave rise to language. Language gave rise to cooperation. Cooperation gave rise to society. And society, in turn, created new tools, new expectations, new structures, new pressures. The original hammer may have been made of stone, but eventually it became symbolic. We hammered out laws, morals, systems, and eventually those systems began hammering us. Fast forward. Now the tools aren't stones and fire. They're algorithms and screens, calendars and currencies, governments and ideologies. Every tool we've ever built has, in some way, shaped our perception of the world. Money was meant to be a tool for exchange. Now it defines value of objects, of time, of people. Social media was meant to connect us. Now it shapes how we see ourselves, what we believe, who we trust. AI was meant to automate labor. Now it raises questions about what labor is, what intelligence means, what role we still play in the world we've mechanized. You are no longer simply the maker of tools. You are the shaped product of every tool your ancestors built. And here's where the paradox twists. Because the more powerful the tool, the more invisible its influence. We believe we're still in charge, that we're using the technology, the system, the process. But often, it's using us. Think of your phone. You believe you're choosing when to pick it up, what to scroll, who to respond to. But it's been engineered by algorithms, by design psychology, to make those decisions for you. The tool learned how you work. It adapted not just to your hand, but to your attention, your loneliness, your need for stimulation. The sword was once an extension of the hand. Now the screen is an extension of the brain, and while the sword could kill, the screen can reshape identity. That's the danger and the wonder, because tools are never neutral. Every invention contains assumptions. Every device comes with invisible rules about how time is used, how relationships are managed, how the self is constructed. And most of us follow those rules without even realizing they exist. So the question isn't, what can this tool do for me? The question is, what is this tool doing to me? And deeper still, am I still the maker, or have I become the made? You see, evolution didn't stop with biology. It migrated into culture, into code, into the very tools we once believed were ours to control. And now, with every tap, every purchase, every post, the tools observe, they shape, they guide. You created them, but now they are creating you. You speak every day. Words pass through your lips without a second thought. Greetings, questions, excuses, confessions. You talk to survive, to connect, to convince. Language feels like your greatest gift, the bridge between minds. But what if that bridge was built on deception? This is the paradox of the voice that lied us into survival. The idea that language, humanity's defining feature, didn't evolve to tell the truth, but to manipulate reality in our favor. That survival didn't come from honesty, but from the careful crafting of illusions we could convince others and ourselves to believe. It begins in the deep past, when early humans needed more than muscle to stay alive. Cooperation was essential. Hunting, gathering, defending, nurturing. But cooperation required communication, and communication, it required belief. So our ancestors developed language, not just to describe what was, but to suggest what could be. They used words to promise food, to form alliances, to build myths and meanings into empty spaces. And those who could speak convincingly, who could paint the most vivid picture of a reward, a danger, a rule, or a future, were the ones who thrived. But persuasion has a shadow. Because once we gained the ability to shape meaning, we gained the ability to distort it, to exaggerate, to withhold, to manipulate, to lie. And this wasn't a bug in the system, it was the feature that made it work. Lying gave early humans advantages, feigned strength, exaggerated threats, false promises of loyalty. A good lie could save your life. A powerful story could hold a tribe together. A convincing excuse could avoid a fight or cover a mistake. In fact, some anthropologists suggest that the more convincingly someone could lie, the more likely they were to climb social hierarchies. And here's where the paradox emerges. The very tool meant to transmit truth evolved by favoring falsehood. The better we became at communicating, the more we relied on strategic dishonesty, not just with others, but with ourselves. Self-deception became a survival mechanism, telling ourselves we were right, noble, deserving, even when we weren't. Believing in hope, even when all signs pointed to despair. Forgetting the pain we caused to preserve the image of being good. Our voice became a mask, and we wore it so well, we forgot there was a face underneath. Even today, the voice lies constantly, not just in the obvious ways, white lies, excuses, advertisements, but in the silent scripts that run through your mind. I'll be happy when... They probably don't like me. This is all my fault. I need to pretend I'm okay. These aren't facts. They're stories. Narratives constructed by a mind that inherited a voice designed not for truth, but for utility, for survival. And the loop begins here. You want to be honest. You crave authenticity, but your words are shaped by fear, memory, culture, insecurity. You censor yourself without realizing it. You curate your identity every time you speak. You say what's expected, not what's real. But the strangest part, so does everyone else. Entire societies are built on shared illusions, constructs like money, borders, time, morality, status. We agree to believe in these things because they create order, but beneath them is language, and beneath language is fiction. So now you're caught in the paradox. To survive, you must speak, but to speak, you must distort. And in distorting, you become both more human and less real. But perhaps that's not failure. Perhaps the lie isn't always harmful. Maybe it's what allows us to imagine, to comfort, to dream. After all, stories are lies wrapped in truth. And sometimes the right lie saves a life, builds a bridge, mends a wound. Your voice is not evil. It's adaptive, fluid, complex. It can wound, but it can also heal. It can hide, but it can also reveal. So speak, but listen too, especially to what you tell yourself. Because your survival may have once depended on the lie, but your growth may now depend on seeing through it. You wave, you nod, you smile politely, even when you're dying inside. You give a thumbs up, a handshake, a pat on the back. These gestures feel natural, automatic even, as if they've always been with you. But have you ever stopped to wonder why? This is the paradox of the gesture that outlived meaning, a relic of human evolution where physical signals, once vital for survival, remain embedded in our behavior long after their original purpose has vanished. We still perform them, still rely on them, but often without understanding what they were meant to do. Long before language, before structured words and grammar, early humans relied on gesture to survive. It was the first true communication. Hands raised to signal danger, fingers pointed toward food, facial expressions used to soothe, warn, seduce. These gestures weren't ornamental. They were functional, wired directly into survival. A raised eyebrow could mean suspicion. An open palm could mean peace. A direct stare could mean challenge. Or invitation. In tight-knit groups, gesture was everything. It conveyed trust and danger faster than words ever could. It allowed for silent coordination during a hunt. It de-escalated conflict before it turned fatal. It preserved cohesion in a fragile social web where misunderstanding could mean exile or death. But as we developed language, gesture didn't disappear. It followed. It became background, reinforcing words, softening tone, smoothing interaction. But here's the twist. Over time, we stopped noticing the meaning behind many of these gestures. We kept using them because everyone else did. And now, we're left performing rituals whose original function has long since eroded. Think of the handshake. It likely originated as a way to show you weren't holding a weapon. It was a declaration of peace in a world where trust was scarce. But today, we do it in job interviews and awkward introductions, even though no one's checking our sleeves for daggers. Think of smiling. Among primates, baring teeth is often a threat. But humans flipped it, used it to show warmth, non-aggression, friendliness. Now, we're expected to smile in customer service jobs, in social media photos, even when grieving. It's no longer a gesture of feeling, It's become a performance. And here's where the paradox deepens. We still respond to gestures emotionally, instinctively, yet we often misunderstand or ignore their original signals. A person fidgets, and we think they're suspicious, but they might just be anxious. Someone avoids eye contact and we assume dishonesty, not realizing that in some cultures, direct eye contact is considered disrespectful. We've inherited the signals, but lost the manual. So we loop. We perform without understanding. We interpret without accuracy. We act out ancient scripts with modern expectations, and then wonder why connection feels confusing. In digital life, the loop mutates even further. We now send thumbs up emojis in text messages. We like posts, not because we genuinely agree, but because it's polite. We use the laughing face to avoid discomfort. We replace tears with reaction buttons. Gestures, once tied to real-time emotion and proximity, have become abstract, flattened, repurposed, and often empty. Yet we still crave their impact. We still feel warmth from a genuine smile, still recoil from a glare, still notice when a hug feels off. Because beneath the performance is a nervous system that remembers. Even if our minds forget the meaning, our bodies still respond. The gesture still works, even if its message is warped. So what do? Do we discard the gestures that no longer serve us? Or do we relearn them, trace them back to their roots, examine how they evolved, and decide how to use them with intention? Maybe the answer isn't to stop gesturing. Maybe it's to start noticing, to see which signals you're sending and why. To observe how your body speaks when your mouth is silent. To reclaim gestures not as unconscious habits, but as opportunities for truth in a world full of noise. Because when a gesture outlives its meaning, it becomes a ghost. But if you look closely, if you listen with your eyes and feel with your skin, you might still hear what it's trying to say. You wake up in a bed, inside a house, in a world of grocery stores, smartphones, and desk chairs. You order food with a tap, heat your environment with buttons, and fight battles behind screens. And yet, beneath all of that, is a body that doesn't belong here. This is the paradox of the body built for a world that vanished. A silent evolutionary conflict where your physical form is optimized for a life that no longer exists, while the world around you races further and further away from it. Your body wasn't made for this world. It was sculpted by scarcity, by danger, by movement. For over 99% of human existence, you lived as a hunter-gatherer, chasing food, avoiding predators, exposed to elements, surrounded by a tight-knit group of kin. Your body adapted to that environment over millennia. Strong legs for walking long distances, sharp senses for reading terrain, hormone systems for responding instantly to threat. And then, everything changed. Agriculture arrived just 10,000 years ago, a blink in evolutionary time. Cities followed. Technology followed faster, and in the span of just a few hundred generations, the human environment became unrecognizable. But your body didn't catch up. You're still running a Stone Age operating system in a digital age machine. Your hunger mechanisms crave sugar and fat because they were once rare and life-saving. Now they're everywhere, engineered, marketed, addictive. You overeat not because you're weak, but because you're well adapted to a world that no longer exists. You sit all day, but your spine wasn't built for that. You breathe shallowly, but your lungs evolved for exertion, for climbing, for running. You go days without meaningful physical effort, and your muscles whisper, "This isn't right." Your body aches not from damage, but from confusion. It's not just physical. Your nervous system, once designed to respond to real, immediate threats, like a predator's stare or a sudden storm, now triggers for emails, traffic, social judgment. Your brain can't tell the difference. Cortisol floods, heart rate spikes. The same system that once saved your life now chips away at it daily. You don't sleep deeply because your body still thinks it might need to wake and flee. You don't feel safe even in locked rooms because your ancient programming is scanning for invisible threats, rejection, failure, humiliation. You feel anxious, not because you're broken, but because you are wild hardware running inside an artificial world. And here's where the paradox becomes cruel. You try to fix these symptoms. Diet, fads, fitness programs, meditation apps, but many of those solutions are just more artifacts of the modern world. A gym is a simulation of the forest. A diet plan is a simulation of a natural food cycle. A mindfulness app is a simulation of the silence we abandoned when we built our cities. You are simulating the very world your body was meant to live in, because the real version no longer exists. And yet, your body continues. It adapts, even if slowly. It tries to keep up, bending to fit an environment that rarely bends back. You survive. You even thrive sometimes. But at a cost. You're tired in a way you can't explain. Hungry in ways food can't fix. Disconnected in ways Wi-Fi can't solve. And that's the deeper wound, because your body isn't just missing food or exercise, it's missing belonging. Physical closeness, community, nature, risk, purpose. All the sensory, emotional, and physiological cues that shaped human evolution are flickering out, replaced by screens and schedules. But what if the answer isn't going backward? What if the goal isn't to become prehistoric again, but to listen more closely to what your ancient body is still whispering? To walk more, even if nowhere in particular. To sweat. To rest when the sun goes down. To connect with others not through curated profiles, but through skin, eye, voice. To eat real food. To move often. To embrace boredom. To feel silence. Your body was made for a vanished world. But maybe, just maybe, the ghost of that world still lives in you, and it's asking to be remembered. Fear was your first teacher. It arrived before language, before memory, before thought. You felt it in your bones, in your gut, in the way your eyes widened at movement in the dark. It sharpened your instincts, quickened your pulse, and kept your ancestors alive long enough to make more of you. But now, fear is doing something else, something far more complicated. This is the paradox of the fear that kept us alive and alone. A survival mechanism so deeply wired into the human mind that it not only preserved us as a species, but gradually began to separate us from each other. In the ancestral world, fear was immediate and useful. You heard a twig snap and froze. You saw eyes in the bushes and ran. Fear worked as a biological alarm system, fast, unconscious, and often life-saving. Those who feared the right things lived. Those who didn't pass on their genes. But the fear response wasn't just about predators and cliffs. It also tuned itself to social dynamics. Humans are tribal by nature, and fear helped us maintain harmony and cohesion. Fear of exile, fear of shame, fear of not belonging. These emotions developed not out of weakness, but out of necessity. In the wild, being cast out of your group was often a death sentence. You feared disapproval because it once meant danger. But as societies grew and modern life emerged, the context changed, and fear didn't. Today, The threat isn't a tiger in the dark. It's a text left on read. It's a room full of strangers. It's a mistake in public, a silent judgment, an imagined humiliation. Fear still reacts as if everything is life or death, even when nothing is. The alarm system still fires, but now it misfires. You fear vulnerability. You fear rejection. You fear being truly seen. And so you hide, not from physical threats, but from emotional exposure. You keep parts of yourself locked away behind silence, performance, and detachment. You protect your image the way your ancestors protected their lives. Fear still keeps you safe, but now it also keeps you alone. You avoid hard conversations to maintain peace. You stay silent in a room where you long to speak. You hesitate to love deeply, afraid of being left. You pretend you don't care, because caring has become too risky. The same fear that once saved your tribe now prevents connection. The wiring that once bonded small groups now isolates individuals in crowds of millions. You are surrounded by others and yet feel invisible. You scroll, you like, you react, but you rarely reveal, because fear whispers. If they see the real you, they will leave, and the paradox deepens. Because the more isolated you feel, the more fear grows. Loneliness feeds anxiety. Disconnection magnifies perceived threats. The less you connect, the less you trust. And the less you trust, the harder it becomes to connect. The very instinct meant to bring you into community now becomes the force that pushes you out. You might ask, can fear be unlearned? Not completely. And maybe it shouldn't be. Fear is still part of your architecture. It still protects you when real danger arises. The goal isn't to erase fear, it's to understand it, to separate instinct from illusion, to ask in every moment, is this fear helping me or holding me hostage? And slowly, you begin to retrain the alarm. You speak, even if your voice shakes. You reach out, even if you're unsure how they'll respond. You allow yourself to be seen, not because it's safe, but because it's worth the risk. Because connection, like survival, takes courage. And courage doesn't mean the absence of fear. It means moving anyway. Your fear kept you alive, but now it might be keeping you from truly living. You think of memory as a record, a personal archive of your life's events. You trust it to guide your choices, shape your values, protect your identity. You believe your memories define who you are. But what if those memories aren't what they seem? What if they're not just inaccurate, but manipulative? This is the paradox of the memory that rewrote evolution. The strange loop where memory didn't simply preserve our past, but reshaped it so thoroughly that it changed how we evolved, who we became, and what we believe about reality itself. In the animal world, memory is short and functional. A gazelle remembers where danger lies. A bear recalls where berries bloom. It's mechanical, survival-focused, and short-term. But in humans, memory became something else, something vast, emotional, symbolic. Our brains evolved to recreate the past, not just record it. That's where the paradox begins, because human memory is not a file, it's a reconstruction. Every time you recall something, you aren't playing a tape. You're rewriting the script. Emotions color it. Context distorts it. New information retroactively changes how the memory feels. And each recall modifies the original just a little more. In other words, your memory is a story, constantly edited. This wouldn't be a problem if we didn't treat those stories as sacred. But we do. We base decisions, relationships, even wars on memory. We remember who hurt us, who helped us, who we are, and who we're supposed to become. But those memories are stitched together from fragments, filtered through bias, and shaped by the needs of the present. And still, we trust them. Now imagine this happening across generations. One human tells a story of survival, not exactly as it occurred, but as they needed to remember it. Their version is passed down, shaped into myth, then into belief, then into identity. Over time, entire cultures emerge around reconstructed memories, rituals, fears, taboos, and those beliefs feed back into how people behave, how they raise children, how they choose leaders. Memory has rewritten history so many times that it eventually rewrote evolution itself. Because we no longer evolved purely through biology, we evolved through narrative. Through memories so powerful, they guided selection. Those who remembered trauma more vividly stayed away from danger. Those who remembered love more intensely bonded longer and built more stable communities. Memory sculpted survival, not by truth, but by utility. And here's where the loop tightens. We began selecting not just for physical traits, but for the ability to remember compellingly. The most emotionally vivid stories were the ones remembered and repeated. The brain adapted for narrative coherence over factual accuracy. The storyteller became more powerful than the warrior. Evolution shifted from muscle to myth, so now you live in a world built by memory and haunted by it. You carry memories that control your emotions long after their original event is gone. You flinch from a tone that reminds you of an old fight. You avoid risks because of a failure you might have misremembered. You define yourself by moments that might have never happened exactly as you recall. And you wonder why change feels so hard. It's because memory doesn't just store who you were, it protects that version, even if it's painful, even if it's wrong. The mind defends the story, not because it's true, but because it's yours. But here's the deeper truth. You can't always trust your memories, and yet, that doesn't make them meaningless. Because meaning isn't always born from fact, it's born from feeling. And sometimes, the way you remember something is more important than what actually happened. So what do? You become aware. You treat your memories with compassion, but not blind faith. You let the past inform you, without letting it define you. You learn to ask, is this memory still serving who I want to become? Because memory may have helped humans survive, but it's awareness that may help us evolve. Need is the engine of evolution. Hunger led us to hunt. Cold drove us to build shelter. Loneliness gave rise to tribes. Every human advancement, from tools to language to civilization, grew out of need. We adapt because we want. We survive because we must. But what happens when need goes too far? This is the paradox of the need that created uselessness. The haunting realization that our very ability to fulfill our needs eventually made many of our traits, instincts, and even entire lives functionally obsolete. It starts with success. We invented agriculture to escape hunger. And it worked so well that food became abundant, then processed, then addictive. The need for calories evolved into the craving for excess. Our bodies, designed to hoard energy in times of famine, never updated. Now, those same bodies break down under abundance. Diabetes, heart disease, obesity. We created tools to reduce labor, but now machines do the lifting, the building, the thinking. The body, once tuned for endurance and resilience, now sits in chairs, clicks buttons, shrinks. Our strength is no longer survival critical. Our stamina is underused. The traits that once kept us alive are quietly atrophying in climate-controlled rooms. We needed shelter, so we built homes. Then we built empires. But in protecting ourselves from the elements, we also sealed ourselves off from nature, from risk, from physical discomfort. We eliminated threats and lost the thrill of danger. We forgot what our senses were for, even our emotions, which evolved to motivate connection and cooperation, have been reshaped by overfulfillment. We crave validation, so we engineered infinite streams of social feedback, likes, shares, replies. The reward centers of the brain, once triggered by meaningful connection, are now lit up by symbols on a screen. We feel seen, but not known, stimulated, but not satisfied. You might be thinking, isn't this just progress? Isn't eliminating suffering the goal? Yes and no. Because when needs are fulfilled too easily, too frequently, they lose meaning. What once brought joy becomes baseline. What once motivated growth now breeds stagnation. You no longer strive, you scroll. You no longer build, you consume. The cycle of need and fulfillment, once sacred, becomes noise. And then something stranger happens. You begin to feel useless, not in a dramatic sense, but in a quiet, gnawing way. Like your hands were meant for something more. Like your mind wasn't built for this kind of stillness. You go through the motions. You meet your basic needs. You check the boxes. But somewhere beneath the surface, your biology is asking, what am I for? Because your body still remembers. It remembers hunting, building, protecting, birthing, fleeing, singing, dying. It remembers a time when every action mattered. Now, many of those actions are outsourced, automated, forgotten, and you are left with instincts no longer matched to the world they evolved for. That's the loop. We needed so much. We became unnecessary to ourselves. And the deeper irony, this isn't just personal, it's collective. Entire jobs, skills, crafts, even languages have faded into irrelevance because they're no longer needed. Knowledge passed down for generations now sits in museums or is lost entirely. The wisdom of slowness, of patience, of earning through effort has been replaced by convenience. And while we've gained comfort, we've also lost purpose. But maybe this paradox isn't a curse. Maybe it's an invitation. Because if we can recognize that our needs no longer guide us the way they used to, then we are free to choose our usefulness, to build new roles that aren't based on survival, but on meaning, to engage old instincts in new ways, through creativity, community, challenge, to ask not just, what do I need, but what do I give, because need once shaped evolution, but now it's meaning that must take its place. We like to think of evolution as a story of increasing complexity, intelligence, and, most importantly, freedom. Over time, we imagine humans broke free from instinct, from brute biology, from animal impulse. We created morality, culture, technology. We became choosers, not just survivors. But what if that freedom was an illusion? This is the paradox of the mutation that removed choice. The disturbing idea that the very genetic changes that made us human also locked us into unconscious scripts, reactions, and desires that feel like free will, but aren't. It begins with a truth most forget. Evolution doesn't care about freedom. It only cares about fitness. A mutation survives if it helps an organism reproduce and pass on its genes. Whether that mutation brings joy, suffering, creativity, or torment is irrelevant. So as our species evolved, certain mutations took hold. Some made our brains bigger. Others improved memory. Others tweaked our emotional responses, our hormone levels, our attachment mechanisms. And with every successful mutation, the illusion of agency grew stronger. But here's where it gets strange. One mutation that spread early in Homo sapiens increased our capacity for long-term planning, an enormous advantage. It allowed us to store food, imagine futures, and construct meaning across time. But it also locked us into a mind that can't stop anticipating. We became addicted to prediction, to planning, to worrying. We lost the ability to just be. Our thoughts began looping endlessly around scenarios, regrets, fears, most of which never came true. We call it anxiety, but it's not a glitch. It's an evolutionary feature gone too far. Another mutation enhanced our sensitivity to social cues. Great for living in tribes, essential for cooperation. But now, it makes us hyper-attuned to judgment, to shame, to exclusion. A single glance can send your nervous system into panic. You think you're choosing to care what others think, but your biology decided long before you did. Your hormones, too, are ruled by ancient scripts. Oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, is released not just during intimacy, but during shared suffering. That means you bond through pain, sometimes more deeply than through joy, which may explain why we're drawn to tragic stories, toxic relationships, or memories of loss. Not because we want them, but because our biology rewards them. And then there's dopamine, the molecule of motivation, the chemical behind every craving. You believe you're choosing what excites you, but dopamine is choosing for you. It spikes at novelty, risk, potential reward. It draws you to the scroll, the click the impulse buy. Your choices are often just chemical reactions dressed in logic. The paradox is clear. The more evolved we became, the more controlled we became by internal forces we can't see. Our consciousness grew, but so did the scripts running beneath it. You feel like you're deciding, but you're reacting to trauma, to memory, to scent, to status, to ancestral patterns etched into your DNA. And yet, we believe we're free. That's the final twist of this paradox. Not only did mutations remove choice, they made us believe we had more of it. That's the evolutionary trick. A mind that must feel autonomous in order to function, even if it's mostly following unconscious commands. So what now? Are we prisoners of our own biology? Not entirely. Because even if your choices are influenced, even if your responses are conditioned, there remains a sliver of awareness, small, quiet, but real. You may not control the first thought, but you can witness it. You may not stop the reaction, but you can learn to pause after it. And in that pause lies something powerful. Not freedom in the absolute sense, but freedom from the illusion of freedom, which ironically is more honest and more human. You can't escape the mutations that shaped you, but you can understand them. And sometimes, understanding is the only kind of freedom that evolution ever gave us. Pain is supposed to be useful. It's the body's alarm system, the evolutionary safeguard that stops you from bleeding out, touching fire, or walking on a broken bone. It evolved to protect, to alert, to prevent damage before it becomes fatal. It is, in many ways, the oldest form of intelligence your body possesses. But what if that intelligence failed to evolve with you? This is the paradox of the pain that refused to evolve. The cruel truth that, while nearly every part of humanity has adapted to modern life, pain remains as primal, blunt, and relentless as it was 1,000,000 years ago. Designed for survival, it now lingers long after its purpose is served, turning a biological advantage into a chronic prison. To understand this paradox, we have to go back. In the wild, pain was short-term, a signal to flee, fight, or heal. You were bitten, you ran, you twisted an ankle, you rested. Pain was tied to clear injury, and when the wound closed, the message ended. That worked in a world where injuries were clean, environmental, and time-limited. But human life evolved faster than the pain system ever could. Now, we live in a world where threats aren't always physical, and where physical pain often outlasts the injury, nerve damage, inflammation, stress-induced tension, psychological trauma turned somatic. The pain remains, even when there's no danger left to avoid. The alarm keeps ringing long after the fire has been put out. And what's worse, it doesn't just linger in the body, it embeds itself in the mind. Modern pain doesn't come just from a broken limb. It comes from heartbreak, grief, chronic illness, social exclusion, financial stress, or childhood trauma stored in the tissues like unprocessed grief. Your nervous system can't tell the difference. It sounds the alarm all the same. Your heart races, your muscles tighten, you withdraw. You adapt your life around the pain, making smaller movements, smaller plans, smaller dreams. The body that once used pain to preserve your life now uses it to shrink it. And here's where the paradox deepens. Pain doesn't need a cause to become real. It just needs repetition. The more you feel it, the more sensitized you become to it. Neurons rewire, pathways strengthen. Your body learns pain like a habit, and soon it begins to trigger even when there's no injury at all. You stub your toe, and your brain says, "This is always how it starts." You feel a twinge, and your entire system braces for collapse. This is called central sensitization. It means your brain has turned the volume knob up on pain and forgotten how to turn it back down. Evolution never intended for this. Pain was supposed to help you avoid harm, not trap you in a cycle of it. But because the mechanism itself never evolved to distinguish acute from chronic, real from remembered, it now often causes more damage than the thing it was meant to prevent. And yet, we still listen to it like it's truth. We cancel plans because our back might spasm. We stay guarded because our heart might hurt. We avoid new things because old wounds still burn. But pain, especially now, is no longer a clear message. It's a distortion, a glitch in a once effective system that never adapted to psychological complexity, social alienation, or the slow-burning trauma of modern existence. So what do? You stop treating pain like a command and start treating it like a signal. Not one that's always right, but one that's asking to be understood. Sometimes pain is real. Sometimes it's memory. Sometimes it's fear in disguise. And sometimes healing doesn't come from removing the pain, but from learning how to move with it, talk to it, understand its language without surrendering to its rule. Because pain didn't evolve, but you did. And that awareness may be the first step in evolving beyond what your body still believes it needs to protect you from. Desire feels like forward motion. It's what pulls you into the next meal, the next lover, the next dream. It fuels ambition, art, survival. It feels like progress, like something inherently human. But beneath that momentum lies something unsettling. The realization that in reaching toward what's next, we may be erasing everything that came before. This is the paradox of the desire that erased the past. A loop where longing for more becomes so consuming that memory collapses behind it, leaving us evolutionarily wired to forget the very history that shaped us. In early human life, desire was a survival engine. You desired warmth, food, shelter, and mates not because they were luxuries, but because without them, you'd die. Wanting kept you alive, but that same wanting was never meant to be satisfied. Not fully, Because once you satisfied a need, your mind moved on. It forgot the urgency of the last hunger to focus on the next. Desire, by design, is a system of forgetting, a way of discarding the past to make room for the chase. That system worked well in the wild. You hunted, you ate, you moved on, you loved, you lost, you kept walking. But now, in a world of endless stimulation and imagined futures, desire has scaled beyond survival. You don't just want food, you want novelty, status, recognition, fulfillment. You don't just want safety, you want legacy. And as your desires multiply, so does your forgetfulness. You forget how far you've come. You forget what you once feared. You forget the lessons of the past, overwritten by the pursuit of what's next. Desire becomes a kind of amnesia. You achieve a goal you once thought impossible, only to discount it the moment it's reached. You chase success, thinking it will bring peace, only to reset the bar once it arrives. You fall in love, not realizing you've stopped appreciating the thing you once ached for, because the mind wasn't built to dwell, it was built to yearn. And here's the loop. The more you desire, the less satisfied you become. And the less satisfied you are, the more you forget what once satisfied you. Memory becomes shallow. Gratitude becomes rare. Presence becomes impossible. You tell yourself, I'll look back and appreciate this one day. But that day rarely comes. Because by the time you arrive at the next, your desire has already moved on. This paradox has deep evolutionary roots. Forgetting the past helped early humans escape trauma, recalibrate after failure, and remain emotionally agile. But in the modern world, where past and future collide through constant reflection and media overload, the same mechanism creates disorientation. You don't remember what made you happy last year. You don't recall the quiet joys of old dreams now fulfilled. You don't hold on to the softness of a moment because your mind is already constructing the next one. Desire edits the narrative of your life in real time, erasing the ink as quickly as it dries. And the danger is not just personal, it's cultural. As civilizations chase progress, they forget heritage. Cities rise over ruins. Technology leaps forward while traditions vanish. Societies forget their mistakes and repeat them under new names. Entire generations desire futures they can't name, and in doing so, lose connection to their collective past. So what now? Do you kill desire? Try to silence it? You can't, and you shouldn't. Desire is still necessary. It's still beautiful. It still brings wonder, art, curiosity. But it must be tempered with remembrance, a practice of memory, a resistance to the urge to discard what's already been lived. Because fulfillment doesn't come from endless wanting. It comes from re-inhabiting the things you once longed for, from sitting inside a dream already come true, from recalling not just the ache, but the arrival. Desire erases, but memory restores. And maybe, in that balance, you find not the end of longing, but the wisdom to carry it without losing yourself in the process. Your body acts before your mind can think. A loud sound makes you jump. A shadow on the wall makes your heart race. A sudden insult makes your jaw tighten. These are reflexes, fast, automatic, ancestral. They evolved to keep you alive, bypassing thought, burning straight through your nervous system. But what happens when those ancient survival responses collide with modern problems? This is the paradox of the reflex that backfired, where the very mechanisms designed to protect you begin to harm you, triggered by dangers that no longer threaten your life, but your identity, status, or story. Reflexes are a marvel of evolution. They are shortcuts, instinctive responses formed over millions of years of repetition, danger, and adaptation. Before humans had cities, speech, or even fire, we had reflexes. And in that ancient world, they were life-saving. A saber-toothed cat crouched in the grass. You didn't pause to analyze. You ran. A sudden change in a tribe member's expression. You didn't wait to discuss. You reacted. Survival favored speed, and reflexes delivered it. But today, the dangers we face have changed. They're more abstract, less immediate. Your boss raises an eyebrow. A stranger posts a criticism. A text goes unanswered. None of these things will kill you, and yet your nervous system doesn't know that. It still reacts as if the world is fangs and claws. Your body floods with adrenaline. Your muscles tense. Your heart races. Your breath shortens. You feel the ancient pulse of threat in a world where there is no predator, only pressure. And here's where the backfire begins. These once useful reflexes become misfires. They activate in moments that require patience, compassion, or nuance. And instead, they deliver fight, flight, or freeze. You overreact in an argument. You shut down when challenged. You retreat from opportunity. Not because you're weak, but because your biology is swinging an axe in a world that now requires a scalpel. The reflex becomes a loop. Each time it activates, it reinforces itself. You flinch at criticism, so you avoid feedback. You avoid feedback, so you don't grow. You don't grow, so you stay stuck. The reflex that was meant to move you forward now holds you in place. And it's not just emotional. Consider posture. Under stress, your shoulders hunch, your chest collapses, your jaw clenches. These are protective stances. They once shielded your vital organs, prepared your body to brace for impact. But now, held for too long, they cause chronic pain, fatigue, and tension. Or consider your reflexive response to rejection. Social exclusion once meant death. Being cast out of the tribe meant starvation, vulnerability, isolation. So today, even the possibility of rejection, being left on red, not invited, unfollowed, can trigger a disproportionate physiological and emotional cascade. You overanalyze, you self-blame, you spiral. The danger wasn't real, but the reflex was, and it keeps firing. So what now? How do you undo millions of years of automatic behavior? You don't, but you intervene, not by force, but with awareness. Reflex lives in the body, so the antidote must start in the body too. You pause, you breathe, you ground, you move slower than your instincts want you to. You teach your system, gently, that not every shadow is a threat. It's not easy, because these reflexes are fast, loud, familiar. They feel like you, but they're not you. They are older than you. And sometimes they're outdated. But if you can learn to spot them, to recognize the space between stimulus and reaction, then something opens. A window, a choice, a second that wasn't there before. And in that space, you remember, your reflexes were meant to serve you, not control you. They were forged in a world of immediate danger. But this world is different. It requires softness, stillness, discernment, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to act at all. You've been using language for so long that you've forgotten it's not reality. It's a map, a system of symbols layered over experience. Words give shape to the world. They let you name, describe, explain. Without language, we wouldn't have stories, science, law, or memory. But what happens when those words no longer reflect the world, but replace it? This is the paradox of the language that broke reality. The haunting realization that, while language evolved to help us make sense of the world, it eventually began to alter and distort it. That the more fluently we speak, the less clearly we see. Language began as utility, a grunt, a gesture, a shared sound to signal fire, danger, food, friend. But as human brains expanded and social groups grew more complex, so did the need for more refined communication. Vocabulary multiplied, grammar emerged, syntax layered meaning over sound, metaphors bridged the abstract, and slowly, language stopped describing the world. It started defining it. You no longer see a flash of light in the sky. You see lightning. You no longer feel a tension in your chest. You call it anxiety. You no longer experience death. You speak of afterlife, legacy, mourning. Words don't just describe reality. They shape how you feel it. They compress infinite, raw sensation into manageable, agreed-upon packets of meaning. But here's where it fractures. Because reality, at its core, is messy, fluid, contradictory. But language demands clarity, precision, and definition. So, to speak about the world, you must flatten it. You must reduce nuance to narrative. You must pick a label. You must choose a side, and in doing so, you begin to lose touch with the thing itself. You stop feeling the emotion directly. You reach instead for the correct word. You stop observing the person in front of you. You reach instead for categories: friend, stranger, threat, ally. You stop inhabiting your own experience. You narrate it. I'm sad. I'm broken. I'm healing. These aren't wrong, but they're stories, labels, language. And once you name something, it becomes harder to see beyond that name. You believe you're depressed, and so you act in accordance with it. You believe someone is toxic, and so you cease to see their complexity. You believe your past was traumatic, and so the memory tightens to fit the word. The label becomes a lens. The lens becomes a prison. This is what philosopher Alfred Korzybski meant when he said, "The map is not the territory. Language is a map, but we mistake it for the land itself." And the loop begins. We use language to make meaning, but then we worship the words instead of the meaning. We debate semantics while the experience slips through our fingers. We speak more fluently and feel less honestly. Modern life only intensifies this. We curate captions instead of conversations. We condense identity into bios, hashtags, slogans. We read headlines instead of realities. We assume that if something can't be explained in a sentence, it isn't worth exploring. And here's where the paradox breaks us open. Language is what made civilization possible. But it also gave us lies, propaganda, gaslighting, doublespeak. It gave us beautiful stories and dangerous myths. It gave us empathy and dehumanization. The same tongue that comforts can also destroy. So what now? Do we stop speaking? No, but we must start listening to the silence between the words, to the body beneath the sentence, to the rawness of experience before it is named. Sometimes the truest things can't be said. They must be felt, held, lived. Because language may break reality, but presence can restore it. So speak carefully, but more importantly, see clearly, and when the words no longer feel true, remember, you are not your language. You are the space before the word. We tell ourselves that invention is the pinnacle of human progress. Every wheel, every engine, every piece of software. We celebrate them as triumphs of intelligence, extensions of strength. symbols of control over the world. We marvel at what we've built, at how far we've come. But what if every invention has quietly been taking something away? This is the paradox of the invention that made us weak. The unsettling realization that while tools have enhanced our abilities, they've also eroded the very capacities they were meant to support. That the more powerful our inventions become, the more fragile we become without them. It began with fire. It allowed us to cook, to stay warm, to expand into colder climates. But over time, our jaws shrank, our digestive systems adapted to softness, and the resilience once needed to survive raw environments began to fade. Then came the wheel. It moved weight. It built roads. It connected civilizations. But it also reduced our need to carry, to trek, to endure. Our bodies grew more sedentary. Strength became optional. And then, electricity, engines, elevators, air conditioning, internet. Each innovation solved a problem, while silently removing a skill, a muscle, a tolerance. We invented light and forgot how to sleep with the sun. We invented machines and forgot how to lift with our backs. We invented global communication and forgot how to sit quietly in a room with another person, truly present. Every step forward came with a cost, and we rarely noticed because the benefits were immediate. Convenience became king. Why learn to memorize when you can Google? Why endure discomfort when there's a pill, a thermostat, a shortcut? We call it progress. But it's also dependence. You don't know how to grow your food, build your shelter, or start a fire. You don't need to, but you might feel that quiet unease, that phantom instinct humming beneath the surface, whispering that something has been lost. It's not just physical, it's emotional too. We invented social media to stay connected, but studies show it increases loneliness, anxiety, and comparison. We invented dating apps to find love more efficiently, but the endless options and swipe fatigue have made commitment feel like a trap. We invented digital distraction, but now we can't focus, can't sit with ourselves, can't breathe without reaching for the screen. We made life easier, and in doing so, made ourselves weaker. Not because we're lazy, but because evolution didn't prepare us for luxury. It prepared us for adversity. Challenge is where we developed grit, creativity, cooperation, and without challenge, real, physical, emotional challenge, we become hollow. And here's where the paradox deepens. We keep inventing not just to survive, but to avoid, to escape pain, boredom, discomfort, risk. But those are the very experiences that built us. And when we remove them, we don't just eliminate suffering, we eliminate growth. Resilience comes from struggle, strength comes from friction, wisdom comes from failure, and yet, invention often removes the need for all three. You're left overfed, overstimulated, overprotected, and underdeveloped in the places that matter most. And it gets worse, because now you're no longer just the user of inventions. You are their servant. The phone doesn't serve you, you serve its notifications. The algorithm doesn't inform you, it manipulates your attention. You're not working the machine. The machine is working you, so what now? Do we abandon invention? Return to caves and fire pits? No. But we reclaim agency. We ask, what has this tool taken from me? We examine the cost of convenience. We choose to walk when we could drive, to remember instead of search, to cook instead of order, to struggle gently, on purpose. Because weakness isn't a product of invention, it's a product of forgetting what invention replaced. And maybe the way back isn't through rejection, but through remembering. Remember what your body can do, what your mind was built for, what your ancestors endured, and how much of that endurance still lives in you. You are not fragile. You've just been cushioned. You like to believe you're rational, that your decisions are driven by facts, your values by reason, your identity by logic. You tell yourself that thinking clearly means thinking cleanly, without the interference of emotions. But no matter how intelligent you become, no matter how far science advances or how meticulously you analyze, emotion still decides. This is the paradox of the emotion that survived logic. The haunting truth that while humans evolved reason to rise above instinct, it was emotion that remained the final authority. That no matter how carefully you calculate, the weight of feeling still tips the scale. In the beginning, emotion was simple. Fear kept you alive. Anger protected your tribe. Joy reinforced what worked. Disgust warned you against poison. Sadness slowed you down to process loss. These primal responses shaped not only behavior, but evolution itself. Then came logic. The prefrontal cortex, abstract thought, long-term planning. With it, humans built tools, language, civilization. We became capable of holding complex thoughts, of entertaining contradiction, of calculating beyond instinct. And yet, emotion never left. It sat beneath every decision, coloring it, twisting it, guiding it. You read the data, but it's the feeling that convinces you. You hear the argument, but it's the tone that sways you. You know what's right, but it's the fear of rejection, of failure, of disappointment that holds you back. Even the most logical minds, scientists, philosophers, strategists, are not immune. They're often driven by emotion, the thrill of discovery, the agony of uncertainty, the pride of being correct, the fear of being wrong. And here's where the paradox deepens. Logic may have evolved to help us survive complexity, but emotion is what gives us reason to survive at all. Logic can tell you how to live, but only emotion tells you why. You can reason your way to 1,000 outcomes, but unless one of them feels meaningful, you'll never act. Worse, logic can be twisted to serve emotion. You want something, so your brain constructs reasons to justify it. You fear something, so you selectively gather evidence to support that fear. You love someone, so you forgive what reason says you shouldn't. You hate someone, so you ignore the evidence in their favor. Emotion is the invisible architect of belief. And in the modern world, where facts are abundant, narratives are weaponized and polarization thrives, emotion reigns. Entire populations act against their own interests, not because they lack information, but because the emotional pull of identity, belonging, and fear is stronger than truth. You see this in politics, in religion, in war, in relationships, in business, in the smallest choices. We are not logic machines. We are emotional creatures, using logic to defend emotion. And yet, we keep pretending otherwise. We shame ourselves for crying. We call emotional people irrational. We apologize for feeling, as if it's something to be corrected. But emotion is not the flaw. Emotion is the signal, the original language of the body. To reject it is to cut off half of what makes you human. And here's the strange twist. Emotion isn't the opposite of logic. It's often what activates it. A deep moral emotion, like empathy or disgust, can push you to think more critically. Grief can trigger existential insight, or can drive scientific exploration. love can fuel the most disciplined reasoning you'll ever experience. So what now? Do you surrender to emotion blindly? No. But you stop pretending logic will save you from it. You stop seeing emotion as the enemy of clarity and start seeing it as the starting point of understanding. You ask, what am I feeling? And what is it trying to tell me? You let logic serve emotion, not suppress it. You feel deeply, think carefully, and act with both in balance. Because in the end, it wasn't logic that built humanity's greatest works. It was love, grief, wonder, anger, hope. Emotion didn't just survive logic, it guided it. You see disease as the enemy, something to fear, to avoid, to eliminate. It takes lives, weakens bodies, spreads in silence. It's unpredictable and cruel. And for most of human history, it has been our greatest threat. But hidden beneath its devastation is a strange and disturbing truth. This is the paradox of the disease that built humanity. The idea that without sickness, we wouldn't be who we are. That illness didn't just kill, it shaped us, sculpting our genes, our cultures, our immune systems, and even the architecture of civilization. It began long before recorded history. In small nomadic tribes, when one member got sick, the whole group had to adapt. The survival of the community depended on more than strength. It required care. Someone had to watch the fevered child, treat the wounded, comfort the dying. And in those acts of care, empathy was born, not as a moral philosophy, but as a necessity. Disease became one of the first catalysts for compassion. As humans settled and grew in number, disease grew with us. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. With each increase in population density, new pathogens emerged. Plagues swept through generations, some erasing entire civilizations. But those who survived weren't just lucky, they were changed. Diseases acted as invisible editors of the human genome. Take smallpox. Over time, it killed millions. But those who survived passed on mutations that offered some resistance. The same with malaria, tuberculosis, even the Black Death. Entire genetic lineages were reshaped by who lived and who died. Sickle cell anemia, a painful and deadly disorder, persists in some populations because it offers protection against malaria, a devastating flaw preserved by evolution. Because it helped more than it harmed, pain became inheritance. Your immune system today is a living museum of past diseases. Each antibody, each defense mechanism is a scar of survival, built not by comfort but by exposure, by suffering, by recovery. We did not grow stronger in spite of disease. We grew stronger because of it. But it didn't just shape our biology. Disease changed how we built society. Quarantine is ancient. Cities developed sewers and sanitation not from abstract planning, but from desperation. Cholera outbreaks, contaminated water, corpses in the streets. Medical science as we know it didn't arise from curiosity alone. It arose from necessity. The microscope was born from the mystery of illness. Hospitals from the need to isolate and heal. Germ theory overturned centuries of superstition only when pandemics made ignorance too deadly to tolerate. Even our language reflects this. Viral, infectious, contagious. Words that started with disease and now describe ideas. And here's where the paradox bends further. Disease doesn't just destroy, it connects. Infections spread through touch, breath, intimacy. The very mechanisms that transmit disease are the ones we use to build bonds. Evolution could have made us more isolated, more sterile, but it didn't. It kept us social, even though being social makes us vulnerable. Why? Because what disease takes away, relationship gives back. Community heals faster. Shared immunity spreads. Knowledge passes from one to another. One generation survives and teaches the next. We keep each other alive, even while risking exposure. And that fragile balance is what made us human. But in the modern world, the loop tightens. We fight disease harder than ever. We sanitize, isolate, vaccinate, medicate, and rightly so. But in doing so, we also risk forgetting how disease shaped us, not just in fear, but in function. We want to erase it entirely, but we are still marked by its presence, our behavior, our rituals, our very DNA, and sometimes we now fear each other more than the illness itself. So what do? We don't glorify disease. We don't romanticize suffering. But we acknowledge the strange gift buried in the pain, the way it forged resilience, demanded cooperation, and pulled the best out of us in our darkest moments. Because without disease, there would be fewer graves, but perhaps also fewer stories, fewer breakthroughs, fewer reasons to protect one another. Disease tried to destroy us, but in surviving it, we became more than just animals. We became human. You wake up each day inside a mind that thinks about itself. You're not just alive, you're aware of being alive. You observe your thoughts, question your choices, reflect on your past, worry about your future. This self-reflective loop feels like a miracle, a crown jewel of evolution. But what if it's also a mistake? This is the paradox of the consciousness that forgot its purpose. The haunting idea that awareness evolved to help us survive, but then detached from its original role, and became a source of confusion, dread, and existential unease. Consciousness likely didn't begin with philosophy or beauty. It began with danger, to sense threat, to weigh decisions, to act with foresight. A primitive mind needed just enough awareness to outmaneuver predators, recognize patterns, and make rudimentary plans. Awareness gave us advantage. The ability to reflect increased our odds of survival. But as human brains evolved, that awareness expanded. We didn't just perceive threats, we began perceiving ourselves. We developed self-concept, introspection, memory, and imagination. We asked questions about our origins. We envisioned futures. We imagined things that didn't exist and believed in them. And here's where consciousness began to unravel its own foundation. Because the more aware we became, the more disconnected we grew from instinct. Unlike animals that act based on immediate stimuli, we hesitate, ruminate, spiral. We turn basic emotions into moral crises. We create identities, then panic when they shift. We wonder what we're supposed to do instead of simply doing. We forgot why consciousness emerged in the first place. It was never meant to be this loud. Originally, it served the body. A quiet sentinel, alert and adaptive. But now, it dominates. The mind often overrides the signals of hunger, fatigue, intuition. We eat when we're not hungry. We ignore exhaustion. We suppress emotion. We override instinct with ideology, routine, and self-narrative. Consciousness became the driver, not the tool. And that's where suffering entered. We began to identify not just with what we feel, but why we feel it. We attached meaning to every passing thought. A random moment of sadness became evidence that something is wrong. A moment of joy became something to cling to. Instead of experiencing life, we began interpreting it. Every second, every sensation, filtered through thought, and thought by nature loops. Consciousness doesn't rest. It replays, projects, rewinds. You think about things that already happened. You worry about things that haven't. You layer past trauma over present experience. You try to solve emotions as if they were problems. You think yourself into paralysis because your consciousness is brilliant, but it's also lost. It's searching for a purpose in a world it was never designed to navigate. And here's the painful irony. The smarter we become, the harder it gets. High-functioning minds often suffer more because they feel more, notice more, question more. Awareness turns inward, chewing on itself like a snake eating its tail, and the loop becomes inescapable. We develop philosophies, religions, technologies, and therapies to cope with the burden of being aware. We try to use consciousness to fix itself. Sometimes it works, sometimes it backfires. The mind that was meant to keep us alive now keeps us awake at night, asking questions we can't answer. Why? Am I here? What is this all for? Who am I, really? These questions don't have evolutionary value. They don't help you hunt or flee or heal. But your consciousness can't stop asking them, because it needs meaning like the body needs food. And when it doesn't find meaning, it invents it, or collapses into despair. So what now? Do we try to quiet the mind forever? Retreat into instinct? Abandon thought? No, that too would be forgetting the point. Instead, we remember that consciousness isn't meant to carry everything. That awareness is a flashlight, not the sky. That thinking is powerful, but it's not reality. You return to the breath, to sensation, to presence, to moments not explained, but lived. Because consciousness isn't broken. It's just confused. It was born to serve life, not explain it. And maybe, once we stop demanding answers from it, it will return to its purpose. To notice, to witness, to be. Sleep was once a sacred surrender. The body stilled, the mind softened, and the world dissolved into dream. It was simple, necessary, and automatic, a quiet rhythm of nature. You fell asleep with the setting sun and woke with its return. There was no struggle, no negotiation. But now, for millions, sleep has become a war. This is the paradox of the sleep that became a battlefield, where the very thing evolution designed to restore and protect us has turned into a nightly source of anxiety, frustration, and loss. A basic biological function now corrupted by the very advancements it once supported. It didn't begin this way. For most of human history, sleep was tied to light. We rose and rested with the sun. Our circadian rhythms synced to the rotation of the earth. The pineal gland released melatonin as daylight faded, and darkness cued the body to rest. Sleep came not by effort, but by environment. But the modern world severed that connection. We invented artificial light. We lit up our nights, extended our productivity, banished darkness from our cities. Then came screens, emitting the blue light of daylight deep into midnight hours. The cues your body once trusted became scrambled. The hormone flow that governed your fatigue was overridden by pixels and stimulation. Still, you try to sleep. But now you must try. And that's where the paradox sharpens. Sleep, once effortless, has become a task. Something to schedule, to track, to optimize. You download sleep apps where biometric rings monitor REM cycles. You follow routines, drink teas, darken rooms. And yet, the harder you try to sleep, the further it slips away. Because sleep is not a performance. It's not something you do. It's something you allow. But the more your mind treats it like a goal, the more awake you become. You lie in bed, eyes closed, brain racing. You calculate the hours left before morning. You bargain. If I fall asleep, now I'll still get 5 hours. But the clock ticks louder. Your body remains still. Your mind loops harder. You begin to dread the night. And here's where sleep becomes a battlefield. Because the bed, once a place of rest, now feels like a test you keep failing. You associate it with anxiety, not comfort. With pressure, not peace. Insomnia becomes a learned response, a self-reinforcing cycle. Your body tenses as soon as you enter the room. Your mind prepares to fight sleep instead of welcome it. But this isn't just personal, it's systemic. Our culture glorifies hustle, speed, and productivity. Sleep is seen as weakness, a barrier to efficiency. I'll sleep when I'm dead, people joke, as if rest is optional. Meanwhile, sleep deprivation becomes a badge of honor, a silent killer disguised as discipline. And yet, without sleep, everything unravels. Memory collapses, emotion destabilizes, the immune system weakens, creativity fades, perspective narrows. Mental illness increases. You begin to hallucinate the longer you stay awake, not just visually, but existentially. Reality itself becomes warped. And yet the solution remains what it always was. Not effort, but trust. Trust in the body's ancient wisdom. Trust that sleep is not broken, it's blocked. By noise, by light, by stress, by stimulation, by the modern world and the demands we carry into the night. So what can be done? You don't win the battle by force. You surrender the battlefield. You stop trying to sleep and start creating space for it to happen. You dim the lights. You silence the screens. You let the world slow down before the body does. You let go of the pressure to fall asleep quickly and focus instead on resting fully. Even lying in stillness without sleep is a form of healing. And perhaps more importantly, you begin to reclaim sleep not as a luxury, but as a right, a biological rhythm that belongs to you. Not your job, not your phone, not your to-do list. Because in a world that keeps you awake, on purpose, choosing rest becomes an act of rebellion. And sleep, once lost to modern life, begins to return. Not as a reward, but as something more ancient, more essential. As a reminder that you are still part of nature, and nature knows when to rest. You close your eyes and slip into another world. One where physics bends, time fractures, and logic gives way to something stranger, more symbolic. You fly, fall, grieve, love, become someone else. You wake and it fades. A dream, just a dream. But what if dreams are not a side effect of sleep? What if they built the very world you live in? This is the paradox of the dream that engineered culture. The eerie truth that the stories you tell, the beliefs you hold, and the systems you follow may not have come from logic, language, or leadership, but from the architecture of dreaming, minds that never stopped crafting alternate realities in the dark. Dreaming is one of the most ancient human experiences. It predates writing, predates cities. It's found across every culture, in every era, in every human brain. But why do we dream? The traditional view is that dreams are neurological noise, random firings, memory cleanup, cognitive junk. But that view has faded. Increasing evidence suggests dreams are not passive. They're active simulations, mental rehearsals, emotional processing, narrative construction. They don't just reflect our lives, they help shape them. In dreams, the brain becomes its own creator. It constructs entire worlds from fragments of memory, desire and fear. It plays out impossible scenarios. It reconfigures events into symbolism. It lets you mourn things that haven't happened and revisit things that never did. And that capacity for internal world building didn't stay confined to sleep. It spilled outward. We began sharing our dreams, turning them into myths. The snake that chased you became a god. The flying vision became a prophecy. The voice in the dream became a rule, a ritual, a story passed down through generations. The oldest religions, the earliest tribal laws, the very concept of the afterlife, all rooted in dreams. This wasn't fantasy, it was survival. Dreams offered a private space to simulate conflict, process trauma, explore risk, a way to experience without consequence. And in early human groups, those who dreamed vividly could imagine new solutions, see hidden patterns, and bring back visions that unified or warned the tribe. The dreamer wasn't just an artist, they were a leader, and over time dreams began to seed culture. Rituals, superstitions, archetypes, masks and metaphors, entire moral systems anchored to visions that came in the night. The serpent, the hero, the underworld. These weren't just stories. They were dream logic turned into doctrine. But here's the paradox. As society advanced, as science emerged and rationality gained power, we began to dismiss dreams, to separate waking life from dreaming life, to trust what could be measured and discard what could only be felt. And yet, dreams never left. They went underground, into art, into poetry, into religion, into cinema, where directors build dreamscapes and we sit in the dark, absorbing another person's unconscious, into politics, where symbols and slogans bypass logic and speak to something deeper, into branding, advertising, nationalism, all of it infused with dream logic, archetype, fantasy. We think we live in a world of facts and reason, but we live in stories, and stories are dreams we agreed not to question. Even the self, the idea that you are one coherent, consistent being, is a kind of waking dream. Neuroscience shows how the mind stitches together fragments of memory, identity, and narrative to create the illusion of a continuous you. The same mental processes used in dreaming are used to sustain the ego. You're always dreaming. The only difference is whether your eyes are open or closed. So what now? Do you chase dreams for answers? Do you mine your sleep for truth? Perhaps not literally, but you can begin to respect what dreams reveal. The symbolic language of the mind, the chaos beneath logic. The parts of yourself that can't speak, but still demand to be heard. Dreams remind us that not all truth arrives as data. Some truth arrives as metaphor, some as memory dressed in disguise, some as feeling that refuses to fade with the sunrise. And maybe, just maybe, your culture, your convictions, even your consciousness itself, was dreamt before it was ever spoken. Touch was the first language, before words, before fire, before the wheel. You reached out, a hand on the shoulder to soothe, a cradle to protect, a brush of skin to say, I'm here and you're not alone. It was primal, universal, undeniable. For most of human history, touch wasn't a luxury. It was survival. But now, we live in a world that touches less and communicates more. We're more connected than ever, yet further apart than we've ever been. This is the paradox of the touch, that devolved into distance, the slow erosion of physical presence in a hypersocial species, where the most ancient form of connection has been replaced by abstract signs, digital pings, and simulated affection. We still reach out, but now we do it without ever getting close. Touch shaped the brain long before language. Infants need it not just for comfort, but for development. Babies deprived of touch suffer stunted growth, impaired immunity, and emotional disruption. The nervous system itself matures through skin-to-skin contact. Oxytocin is released. Cortisol levels drop. The body says, "You're safe." This didn't change as we aged. Throughout evolution, human beings huddled, held, groomed, carried, leaned. In danger we touched. In grief we held. In joy we danced, embraced, collided. Touch was embedded into the structure of society, ritualized in handshakes, kisses, shoulder pats, tribal dances, and then the distance began. At first, it was physical. Cities replaced villages, homes grew more private. Transportation meant we didn't walk side by side, we drove alone. Then came devices. Letters replaced visits. Phones replaced letters. Texts replaced calls. Emojis replaced faces. A tap of a screen became a stand-in for a hug. We still say "I'm here," but we no longer reach out. You now live in a world where entire relationships can form and die without a single touch. You can confess your heart, end a friendship, share grief, even declare love through words alone. And while these words have power, they lack weight. They carry meaning, but not presence. The body notices. Loneliness has surged, not because people are unreachable, but because they're untouchable. The nervous system craves contact it doesn't receive. Skin goes untouched for weeks, even months. We anesthetize with entertainment, stimulation, content, but the deeper need remains unmet. And yet, this distance is often chosen, because touch is now entangled with discomfort. Social norms have changed. Physical contact feels intrusive, risky, even inappropriate. We fear crossing lines, making others uncomfortable, being misunderstood. The safest connection is now the most distant one. Even in love, we hesitate. We send heart emojis instead of holding hands. We say "I miss you" without making plans. We feel longing, but numbness too. We are intimate and isolated. Touch has become symbolic, stylized, stripped of its animal wisdom. Where once it grounded us, now it's something to schedule, to analyze, to simulate through vibrating screens and voice notes. And here's the deeper paradox. The more we communicate through technology, the less we need touch to function, but the more we need it to feel alive. Because touch doesn't just inform, it regulates. It calms the heart. It soothes the mind. It reminds us we are real, not just avatars floating in abstract thought. Without it, we drift further into a mental space unmoored from the body. So what now? You won't return to the tribal circle. You won't undo technology, but you can become aware. You can ask, when was the last time I offered comfort with my hands, not just my words? When was the last time I allowed myself to be held? Not fixed, not saved, just held. You can reclaim touch, not as romance, not as obligation, but as presence. Hand on the back, a shared meal, a held gaze, a quiet shoulder. These are not extras, they are anchors. Because when touch disappears, so does something essential about being human. And sometimes, to close the widest distance, you only need to reach across a few inches. You've been told that sacrifice is noble, that to give something up, comfort, safety, time, dreams, is a sign of strength, love, or loyalty. From the beginning of civilization, sacrifice has been woven into our mythologies and rituals. The parent sacrifices for the child, the soldier for the nation, the believer for salvation, the artist for truth. We admire those who give everything, but what if sacrifice doesn't always lead to meaning? This is the paradox of the sacrifice that wasn't worth it. The brutal recognition that not all losses transform, that not every offering is honored, and that the human instinct to give away parts of oneself can sometimes result in nothing but emptiness. Evolution taught us sacrifice in the language of cost and return. You exert energy to chase prey, but only if the calories gained are more than those burned. You protect your group because their survival increases yours. You give now to gain later. Sacrifice was once a calculated exchange, but human consciousness changed the equation. We began to sacrifice not just for tangible outcomes, but for ideals, for love, for legacy, for belief. We sacrificed our time, energy, potential, often without guarantee, and sometimes without clarity. You stay in a job you hate, sacrificing years because you were told stability is success. You remain in a relationship that drains you because you're afraid of what leaving would mean. You suppress your creativity, your voice, your need for rest, believing that suffering somehow equals value. You were never promised anything in return, but you hoped. And that's what makes this paradox so devastating. Because when sacrifice does not lead to reward, when the pain, the compromise, the endurance ends in silence instead of transformation, it doesn't just wound, it shakes your entire foundation. You start to wonder, was it all for nothing? And here's where the loop begins. You look back and see time lost, opportunities missed, parts of yourself you handed over and never got back. And yet, even in the face of that, you keep sacrificing because turning back would make the cost feel even less worth it. This is known as the sunk cost fallacy. The more you invest in something, the harder it is to leave, even when it's hurting you. Your brain fights to protect the illusion that the sacrifice had value. You build justifications. You tell yourself you grew from it, that you're stronger, that it had to happen this way. And sometimes those things are true, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes the sacrifice was misplaced. The outcome was silence. The reward never came, and you're left holding the empty shell of what you thought would be purpose. It's tempting to silence that realization, to force meaning where there is none. But the truth is, not all sacrifices are wise. Some are based on false hope, manipulation, fear, or cultural programming. And admitting that doesn't make you weak, it makes you free. Because here's the twist. Sacrifice isn't always about what you give. It's about what you choose not to give anymore. You can draw the line. You can say, I gave enough. I bled enough. I don't need to lose more to prove I loved, believed, or tried. You can walk away and let the sacrifice remain unfinished. That too is strength. Because the purpose of sacrifice isn't pain, it's alignment. And when sacrifice no longer aligns with your values, your well-being, or your truth, it is no longer sacred. It is surrender to systems, to stories, to the fear of disappointing others at the cost of yourself. So what now? You grieve the parts of you that were given away without return. You honor the intentions behind them, but you stop letting past losses dictate future ones. You reclaim your time, your energy, your worth, because the hardest sacrifices are the ones you no longer owe. And sometimes, the most honest thing you can say is, it wasn't worth it, but I am still worth everything. We often treat intelligence like a prize. The smarter we are, the better equipped we become. Capable of solving problems, building civilizations, exploring the stars. From fire to physics, intelligence has lifted humanity beyond the limits of instinct. It made us gods in the eyes of other animals, but somewhere along the way, that gift turned in on itself. This is the paradox of the intelligence that hunted itself. The realization that human intelligence didn't just evolve to solve problems, it evolved to interrogate itself, to the point where the mind, once built to explore the world, began to dismantle its own stability from within. It starts innocently. You learn, you observe, you ask why, you seek patterns, cause and effect. This curiosity is what separates you from creatures that only react. You look into the world and then back into yourself. You examine your motives, your fears, your beliefs. The mirror of intelligence reflects inward. At first, this self-awareness brings growth. You become capable of emotional regulation, ethical reflection, abstract thinking, but the mirror doesn't stop at clarity. It keeps reflecting. Each answer leads to a deeper question. Each layer of insight reveals a flaw, a contradiction. You discover you can't trust your memory, that your perception is filtered, that your logic is shaped by bias, that your thoughts are not fully your own, and this realization that intelligence is imperfect compels you to turn it back on itself. You begin to analyze your own analyzer. You think about thinking, then question that, then question the questioning. The loop tightens. This is metacognition, the crown jewel of human thought and the birthplace of recursive distress. You wonder, am I good? But then ask, is good a useful construct? You ask, why do I want this? But then, do I really want, or am I conditioned to want? Eventually, you stop being certain of anything, and here, intelligence begins to hunt itself. Because certainty becomes fragile, identity becomes fiction, truth becomes relative. Even logic, your supposed anchor, feels like another construct of a brain designed for survival, not accuracy. You start to see intelligence not as a straight line, but as a spiral. Every new insight pushes you further from solid ground. You can explain more than ever, but believe less than ever. You are no longer sure what to defend. And often, the most intelligent people suffer the most from this loop. Not because they lack answers, but because they see too many possible ones. This is what Nietzsche called the abyss, the danger of looking too deeply and finding nothing firm beneath your feet. It's what certain mystics described as the dark night of the soul, and what modern psychology might recognize as existential depression. The mind begins to consume itself, and in the process, it can erode meaning. What was once curiosity becomes obsession. What was once self-awareness becomes self-doubt. What was once insight becomes paralysis. Because the very intelligence that helped us conquer nature has no idea how to live peacefully within it. But here's where the paradox softens. Because this collapse is not the end of intelligence. It's a test of integration. You can't unknow what you've seen. You can't make your mind stop reflecting, but you can choose how to relate to that reflection. You stop using intelligence as a scalpel against yourself and start using it as a lens of compassion. You begin to see that questions don't always need answers. That ambiguity isn't weakness, that knowing you don't know is not a flaw, but a doorway. You let intelligence be brilliant without demanding it always be useful. You let it wonder without needing to win. And perhaps most radically, you allow intelligence to rest, to breathe, to feel without fixing. Because the highest form of intelligence may not be control, It may be surrender, not to ignorance, but to complexity, not to confusion, but to openness. Because maybe intelligence's final evolution is learning when to stop chasing itself. We celebrate kindness. We teach generosity. We're told that the highest form of human evolution is to care for others, not just because it feels good, but because it builds trust, harmony, community. Altruism is often described as the moral pinnacle, giving without expecting anything in return. But what if altruism is not as pure as we believe? This is the paradox of the altruism that masked control, the unsettling idea that acts of kindness, compassion, and selflessness can often be motivated not by love or duty, but by a hidden desire to control, influence, or shape the world and people around us. In nature, altruism is not rare, but it's always strategic. In animal behavior, altruistic acts tend to increase the survival chances of one's genes. A meerkat stands guard to protect its relatives. A bee sacrifices itself for the hive. These aren't moral choices, they're biological investments. Humans took it further. We developed complex societies where helping others became not just evolutionary, but emotional. We take pride in our sacrifices. We value those who serve. We tell ourselves, to give is to be good, but the human mind rarely acts from one motive alone. We help, but we often want something in return. Approval, gratitude, belonging, power, moral superiority. It's not always conscious. You offer advice to a friend, but deep down, you want them to follow it, to validate your wisdom. You give your time to someone in need, but you expect appreciation or loyalty, or at least acknowledgement. When they don't respond the way you hoped, something stirs in you: resentment, control, withdrawal. The selfless act begins to unravel. Because the help wasn't truly unconditional, it came with invisible strings. And this is where the paradox tightens. Altruism becomes a subtle tool of dominance. I did this for you, so now you owe me. I sacrificed, so I get to set the rules. I gave so much, so I get to decide what happens next. Kindness in this form becomes a currency, a quiet contract no one signed, but everyone feels. We use good deeds as leverage. We guilt others into compliance. We mask manipulation behind compassion. This isn't just personal, it's cultural. Charities with strings attached. Parenting that demands obedience in return for love. Relationships where care is given, but only in exchange for control. Nations offering aid that comes with political conditions. We call it help, but often it's a disguised negotiation. And here's the deeper wound. Those who give the most often carry the deepest expectations. Because giving becomes identity. Sacrifice becomes moral capital. And when that capital isn't returned, it feels like betrayal. This doesn't mean altruism is fake. It means it's complicated, rarely pure, always layered. We want to help, but we also want to be seen. We want others to be well, but we want to be needed in that wellness. We want to be generous, but also irreplaceable. So what now? Do we stop helping? Harden our hearts? Reject the instinct to care? No. But we examine it. We pause before giving and ask, am I doing this to empower or to control? Would I still do it if no one noticed? If no one thanked me? Am I giving to serve or to shape? Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to let them choose, even if it means they refuse your help, even if it means they fail, even if they walk away. Because true altruism is not just about giving, it's about letting go of control, of expectation, of the need to be the savior in someone else's story. Because when your kindness is tied to control, it's not love, it's ownership. And ownership, no matter how soft its voice, is still a cage. Real compassion frees the other person and yourself. So give, but give lightly, without grip, without needing to shape the outcome. Because that's where real love lives, not in sacrifice that controls, but in care that releases. Hope is humanity's flame. In every era, through every crisis, we've clung to it, not as a luxury, but as a survival mechanism. Hope whispered to us in famines, in wars, in darkness. Keep going, it said. Things will get better. It's been called irrational, stubborn, divine. Without hope, we're told, we die. But what if hope is also the reason we keep walking toward our own destruction? This is the paradox of the hope that delayed extinction. The haunting possibility that our most cherished psychological adaptation, the thing that made us endure, might now be the very thing that prevents us from changing course. In the ancient world, hope served the struggling. When crops failed or winter deepened, people needed to believe that spring would return. Hope made suffering bearable. It pulled us through the valley when logic told us we'd never reach the other side. It was anti-factual, but functionally effective. Evolution doesn't select for truth, it selects for survival. And hope, even when it was based on illusion, helped us survive. So we evolved to tell stories of salvation, myths of rebirth, prophecies of redemption. The flood would end, the gods would return, the chosen one would rise. These weren't just stories, they were strategies for emotional endurance. They gave shape to chaos. But here's where hope changed. As we built civilizations, we stopped hoping for nature's return and started hoping for our systems to save us. Hope migrated from the sacred to the technological, from ritual to politics. We started believing that no matter how bad things got, something would arrive just in time. And that belief never left us. It now lives in every denial of collapse. We pollute the oceans, but hope science will clean them. We burn forests, but hope future generations will replant them. We isolate behind screens, but hope connection will come someday, somehow. We build systems that hollow us out, and hope those systems will also heal us. Hope lets us press snooze on catastrophe. Not because we're evil, but because hope feels better than action. It's easier to believe someone will fix it, that nature will bounce back, that the world always corrects itself. And in that belief, we delay responsibility. We defer the hard choice. We postpone the necessary grief. And slowly, the window to act begins to close. This isn't just about the environment or society, it's internal too. We stay in toxic relationships hoping they'll change. We avoid our purpose, hoping it will find us. We numb our pain, hoping it will fade on its own. Hope becomes an anesthetic. Beautiful, gentle, deadly, because hope doesn't guarantee anything. It only postpones certainty. And sometimes, postponing certainty is exactly what kills us. But here's where the paradox softens. Hope isn't inherently bad. What matters is where you place it. There's a kind of hope that says, I believe someone else will save me. That hope paralyzes. But there's another kind. I believe something better is possible, and I will help make it real. That hope mobilizes. The difference lies in agency. The first hope lets you wait. The second asks you to act. So what now? You don't kill hope. You reclaim it. You tear it from the clouds and plant it in the soil. You stop using it to escape the present and start using it to transform it. Hope, when grounded, becomes fuel. It becomes a reason to try again, to build differently, to speak up, to walk away, to care, even when you know the outcome isn't guaranteed, because perhaps the most human thing we've ever done is hope for something better and then build it ourselves, even on the brink of extinction, even when no one else believes, even when it seems too late. Because maybe hope doesn't save us, but maybe it's the reason we're still here. You've wandered through paradoxes that whispered from the bones of your ancestors, from the circuits of your mind, from the architecture of everything human. You've seen how evolution sculpted brilliance from pain, meaning from confusion, survival from contradiction. And now, at the edge of this journey, a strange truth settles in. You were never outside these loops. You are one. Every instinct you inherited, every thought you believed was yours, every sacrifice you made or memory you trusted, all of it was shaped by paradox. Intelligence hunted itself. Emotion survived logic. Tools used their makers. You didn't just witness these tensions. You lived them. You are them. And maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe your complexity isn't something to solve, but something to honor. Maybe the contradiction you carry, the one between progress and pain, hope and denial, instinct and reflection, isn't proof you're broken. It's proof you're still becoming. Because humanity was never a finished product. It was, and is, a process. A mind that questions itself is not failing. A body that feels out of place is not malfunctioning. A life that cycles through clarity and confusion is not off course. These loops are not detours. They are the path. So as you fall asleep tonight, remember, you are not alone in your spirals. You come from a long line of minds that couldn't stop asking why. A lineage of seekers, dreamers, paradox bearers. And what they handed you wasn't perfection. It was mystery. It's yours now to hold, to question, to live. And maybe not escape, but understand. Thank you for listening. Sleep well, thinker. You're part of something ancient, beautiful, and still unfinished.